All right, so welcome to our first class for this workshop that I'm calling Reimagine Your Hip Joints. That title kind of came to me just because I've already presented a program called Reimagine Yourself, a much longer program with 12 different awareness through movement lessons from the Feldenkrais method. But it's something I'm going to be revisiting online with folks this year. And to kick off the year, I thought looking at the hip joints and exploring some pretty interesting lessons from the Feldenkrais archive would be a good way to do that. So that's a little bit of where the title came from. But as I said, maybe you read this leading up to the workshop, I tried to choose 3 Feldenkrais lessons which are not the most well-known. Now, the one we're going to do today is arguably, of the 3, I would guess is the most well-known, and a couple folks here who've done a fair amount of Feldenkrais may well recognize what we do today. But I think that what the public generally doesn't understand is that there's just this vast archive of experiments, essentially, is one of the ways I think of the awareness through movement lessons that Moshe Feldenkrais created. The 3 lessons we're going to do here are taken from a collection called Alexander Yanai, which is the name of the street where Feldenkrais had his studio in Tel Aviv for many years, and he taught over 500 lessons at Alexander Yanai that were documented and are available now. And this is what I'm drawing on. I have a whole bunch of volumes with these transcripts. And in any case, there are those certain Feldenkrais lessons that maybe just because they're such great lessons, we practitioners tend to teach them over and over. You may recognize, for example, the pelvic clock, which is maybe arguably the most famous lesson. And everyone teaches that, and for good reason, because it really is a terrific lesson. It's certainly a lesson that I could include in a class on the hip joints. But what I did want to do is challenge both myself and the participants here to do something that maybe is not so common in the Feldenkrais classes, but is definitely part of the legacy that Moshe Feldenkrais left behind. And something I actually wrote a blog post today about, and I sent out, some of you may have seen, was the whole experience that I go through as a Feldenkrais practitioner in preparing a lesson like this. And I was writing specifically about the lesson that we'll look at tomorrow, which is a very interesting lesson, and I think is arguably the least common in terms of what you would likely find in a public class. But again, in fact, I have right here in front of me one of these notebooks. So this is a notebook of transcripts of Feldenkrais talking that was recorded, and of course he's talking extemporaneously, so there's unfinished sentences, you're not in the room, sometimes he's talking to a student and you can't really get the whole context. But this is what we work with as Feldenkrais practitioners, and we put a lesson together, and there's never really a fully satisfying feeling of, oh, this is what Feldenkrais meant. But there can be a moment where, as you look at what he said and you experiment with the movements and you think about it and you do it for yourself in different ways, you can get closer to a feeling of, oh, this makes sense. I'm feeling something's happening. It sounds like what he's talking about. And I mention that just because for you today and the next couple days, and really in any movement class you go to, and so this includes a yoga class, aerobics class, any kind of movement, there's always that translation, right? There's what the person teaching has to say, and then there's what you understand and what you feel in your body, and then you try something out. And built into the Feldenkrais method is something unique, which is that in general, you will not see the movements demonstrated by the Feldenkrais teacher. There's one unique thing tomorrow, which is just so ripe for confusion that I'm going to do a little demonstration before we start the lesson tomorrow. But today, for the most part, I'm not going to do movements, so you're just going to hear what I'm doing, what I'm saying, and responding to it. So I'd just like to invite you into what that experience means, which means at any given moment, maybe you are doing something a little closer to what's being asked of you. At other moments, maybe a little less. But ultimately, what you're looking for is a feeling that resonates with you. If you're doing something that's going to have this result that we come to class for, that you feel better, that something's easier, there's something in your own experience that's going to tell you that as you go along. And again, as best I can over these web cameras, I'm going to be observing you, and if I see particular things, I'm going to be trying to guide you in a way that will make that a little easier. So just pausing for a second. Hi, Lisa. Good to see you. I don't hear you, but unless you have a question, that's not a big deal. There is something at the bottom left of your screen that looks like a microphone, and you can click to mute or unmute. I'll probably mute everybody in a few minutes. But I just wanted to make sure, do you have a space on the floor near your computer where you can follow the lesson? And when we get there, it'd be great if you were able to direct your camera so I can see you. Okay. So I haven't said a whole lot of general words about the Feldenkrais method just because for one reason or another I happen to know the folks here, and I believe we don't have the situation where there's someone here doing their first ever Feldenkrais lesson. But is there anything about what I've just said that any of you would like to ask a question or make a comment about before we get into the movement? You can just come close to your screen and speak.
Record the demonstration tomorrow because I'm not going to be able to.
Rashmi, can you come a little closer because I can't hear you too well?
Oh, I said, are you going to be recording your demonstration tomorrow?
Yeah. So I'm recording right now, and I will record the entirety of all 3 classes. Okay. And I'll let you know that the 3 classes are, I mean, another practitioner may have put them in another order. I did think of which one was number 1, number 2, number 3, so there is an idea of a sequence. But in any case, if you can make it today and not tomorrow or not the last day, everyone here will get all the recordings. Okay? Great. Thank you. Okay. Well, so I'm just going to say, actually, I think what we'll do is begin, but as we begin, I'm going to keep in mind that there are folks who may see what we're doing today for the first time as a recording, and some of those folks may be new to the Feldenkrais method. So we're going to begin, as we always do, in any case, by lying on the back. And so please go ahead if you're not doing that already and lie down, but if you would, I really appreciate if I can see you. And for the time being, you could choose to have your legs long or the feet standing. We'll work in both of those positions during the movement lesson. But at moments like this, when you just need to rest, we want to make that as easy as possible. And if it helps you to be comfortable to put something underneath your head, any kind of support, as long as it's a firm support, you're welcome to do that. Okay. And I'm just, oh, okay. Sorry, I'm doing a couple things here on my monitor to make sure everyone is muted, which everyone should be at this point. If, as we're going along, something's really confusing, it's still fine if you just come close to the camera and get my attention, and I'll be happy to unmute you and hear any questions if they come up, but we'll try to be as clear as we can. Okay, so the way we always begin a Feldenkrais lesson is by resting, but the way that we're resting is an attentive rest. In other words, we want to begin to notice some things about ourselves as we lie here on the floor. So maybe just begin with your breath. So observe your breath, the quality of your breathing, whether the breathing feels comfortable or not at this moment. And as you breathe, where you feel the breath internally. For some people, it'll be more in the chest. For others, they may feel the expansion more in the abdomen. It's possible that you might feel your breath more clearly on one side of the body. And the idea is to notice, but not to make a judgment about it. And this is a theme that we'll come back to throughout this lesson and probably throughout the 3 days, is how can we move or simply be attentive to ourselves in a way where we don't get tripped up by some kind of internal voice that makes judgments about what's happening. But can we just bring our attention to what is and work with what is in a simple way? Because in fact, this is really an approach that can lead to surprising change. Okay, so now notice your overall contact with the floor. Just feel how the back of your body in all the different places is meeting the floor. And you'll notice that some parts of you meet the floor more completely. Other places may be slightly lifted away from the floor. And a particular focus of what we're going to do today has to do with the area of the low back. So just notice, is there any space between your low back and the floor right now? And if there is any space, it's possible that the sense of space between your low back and the floor might be slightly different on the left versus the right side. So notice each of the two sides of the low back. And just notice how each of your two legs lies on the floor. You have the sense that one leg is more comfortable than the other one. And now, again, pay attention to the shape of your low back in relationship to the floor. And now gently and gradually bring your feet to standing. That means bending the knees and putting the soles of the feet on the floor, and watch what happens in the low back. And just notice, most people I can see decided to stand one foot and then the other. Just notice which leg you began with. And notice here the connection of the low back to the floor, and notice if something is different with the feet standing. Okay, and please now interlace the fingers of your two hands and bring your hands to hold the back of your head, the place where the skull meets the floor right now. So you're supporting your head in your hands. And now, if you bring your elbows a little away from the floor so they come towards each other, feel how you cradle your head in your hands that way. And now, listening to your breath, on an exhale, do a movement of lifting your head and looking down the front of yourself. And as soon as you've done the movement, you can put the head right back down on the floor. So it's not necessary to lift the head very high. In fact, you are invited to do the easiest movement possible. In other words, not the largest movement, the most you could possibly lift the head, but just a simple movement. And the suggestion to do the movement on the exhale is in order to help you to feel the possibility of softening the chest as you lift. So just feel if the chest does, in fact, feel willing to fold. You look down the front of yourself, moving your eyes down as if to see your belly button or down between your knees. And please pause for a moment. You can leave your arms on the floor. So you can take the arms out for a moment, just rest. Okay, and I'll ask you to try the movement just a couple more times, and I'll ask you in particular to notice what changes in the contact of your back with the floor. So whenever you're ready, you can, once again, the feet are still standing, and you interlace the fingers, holding the back of the head, take the elbows towards each other. On an exhale, you lift, looking down, not lifting as high as you possibly can or struggling to lift, but just what's easy. But feel how certain parts of the back are able to mold themselves more into the floor. So in a sense, if you can begin to include more of the whole spine into the image of what you're doing rather than just thinking of the head, you feel that you're folding your spine. The head comes forward, but in the middle of your back, the spine is moving towards the floor. And notice what happens with your pelvis. Do you feel that the change, the back of the pelvis on the floor shifts? Is there a movement of the pelvis up the floor? You feel if you draw your belly in just a little bit as you do the movement, how this goes along with the whole pattern. Okay, leave that alone, please. Put your head on the floor. Keep the feet standing. Actually, go ahead and lengthen the legs. Go ahead and lengthen both legs. And now bring your attention to your left leg and do a little movement where the little toe on the outside of the foot comes a little bit closer to the floor. And then let the leg return to where you began. And by the way, have the feet at least shoulder width apart. You'll see as we go on, the distance between the two legs will affect what we're doing, and you may well make other adjustments as we go along. But now if you just do a small movement of taking the outside of the left foot a little to the floor, just feel what happens throughout the length of your leg. And can you feel that this is a movement that happens in your left hip joint? So make it simple, make it easy. But one thing that's worth mentioning, since we're doing 3 days thinking about the hip joints, where are the hip joints anyway? So for a lot of people, they put their hands in that place where, on the outside of the pelvis, where we go when someone says, put your hands on your hips, and you're maybe a parent scolding their kid or something like this. But what you'll find if you do that is you'll find the bones on the outside of the pelvis. But the actual movement of the ball and socket joint, of the hip joint, is much closer to the midline. So see if you can feel more in the area of the groin on the left side as you do this movement. That something is happening there. And there's quite a lot of tissue and musculature around the hip joint. It's not necessarily always a clear feeling, but put your attention in that area. And every time you take the outside of your foot a little towards the floor, feel what happens with your left knee. See if you can feel the possibility that the left knee can soften and begin to bend. Okay, take a rest for a moment. So we're going to continue this movement and make it a little larger, but we're going to sort of notice the different elements that make up the movement that we're going to build here. So the first movement is just this idea of taking the outside of the foot towards the floor. But now if you go back to the movement again, and you feel this possibility of the bending of the left knee, can you now think of, and I say think of because the idea is that you don't do it all at once, but you begin a process where you gradually start dragging the left heel along the floor up towards your pelvis. So long as it's comfortable, the starting position is that both legs are long and the left foot moves a little towards the floor. To the left knee begins to bend, and you begin to draw the left heel up towards your pelvis. And you just go as far as that feels simple, and then you lengthen the leg back to where you began. But as you begin to draw, you think of drawing the heel along the floor. You're going to be sliding the foot along the floor, along the outside edge of the foot. As you do this, pay attention to your left hip joint and pay attention to your low back on the left side, and just notice if you're working in the low back. Notice if the position of the pelvis on the floor is shifting in any way. And if so, notice where it goes. And you can, little by little, still thinking of moving gently and taking your time, you can continue to grow this movement so that you slide the heel up towards you to the point where maybe it can't really come up anymore, and the knee, meanwhile, is moving out to the side. And when you get to that place, then you could bring the knee back towards the middle over the foot, and you would have your foot standing. So this was what this movement, Feldenkrais, compared to the movement that a frog makes with the legs. So it begins with this turning of the leg to the outside, the knee bending, the heel coming up, and then in a certain moment the leg comes back to the inside with the knee bent, and you find the foot standing. And then, of course, to lengthen the leg again, you slowly take the knee out to the side, and you shift from having the sole of the foot on the floor to being somewhere along the outer edge of the foot, and you lengthen the leg back down. Okay, take a rest. And now let's explore this same thing, but begin with both feet standing. Just notice your process for standing the feet. Standing the feet is already something that we're exploring here. But now, keeping the right foot standing, the right sole of the foot on the floor, slowly take the left knee out to the side. And actually don't go all the way to lengthening the leg. Just take the knee a little to the outside and come back. And as you do that, what happens to the space behind your low back? Do you feel that you begin to arch and move away from the floor in the low back? Okay, bring your foot back to the starting position for a moment. So just, you know if you felt that or not, if the arch seemed to take place to go along with the movement. But now, can you begin to explore the possibility that you could take the left knee out to the side without an arch in the low back? Now, what this may mean is that it's kind of mysterious. If you felt that you were arching, if you take the knee out to the side and you feel that you begin to arch, you might have the sense, well, that's just what happens. But rather than worrying about that, can you simply just begin to take the leg a little out to the side, and as soon as you feel that arching, you bring it back. In other words, you you're trying to do something that you may or may not understand exactly how it's done just yet. But what you can do is recognize the moment where you're beginning to activate those muscles in the back and make a contraction that creates the arch. You recognize that you're doing the thing that you're trying to avoid. And so as much as possible, without judgment, without worrying, without any sense of a slap on the wrist, you just simply say, well, I don't want to continue this movement because I feel that I'm arching. So you just come back. And each time you do the movement, maybe there's a feeling, I'm still not there yet, I'm still not there yet, but maybe there's a small shift. Maybe there's a little less arching. And so you just explore this possibility, and eventually you do go ahead and allow the leg to lengthen. And there may be some small arching that's taking place, but you're just curious about the possibility of doing the movement without that work in the back. And then, of course, you reverse the process and take the edge of the foot to the outside, and the knee goes out, and the heel comes up the middle, and then you bring the knee back over the foot. So you're lengthening the leg and standing the foot with this idea of taking the knee out to the side. And of course, the knee going out to the side is a weight. So the weight of the leg, you may feel pulls on the pelvis. So one thing to think about is the movement of the heel in relation to the knee. And you can think about what is exactly, like if you were to draw it on the floor, what is the line that the heel moves along? Is it the midline? In other words, a line that would go right down below your spine, or is it a line that is more to the outside or more to the inside? And you can experiment with dragging the edge of the foot along different trajectories to find out how does that affect the ability to keep the pelvis, to keep the back quiet, even with this large weight of the knee going to the outside. Where are you taking the foot in relation to the knee? Can you begin to imagine a kind of counterbalance where the weight of the knee to the outside is something that can be somehow managed a little bit more? Okay, and now just to have both feet standing and rest here. And Feldenkrais, when he taught the lesson, he made the point again and again that what he was asking for here was not easy. But if you pay attention now to the feeling in the low back on the left and compare that to the right, maybe you sense just by being curious, by exploring the possibility of making this differentiation, maybe something's already different on one side. And that's the whole story right there. Whether or not we succeed in doing the thing that's being described, it's this curious pursuit that can lead to change in the system. So beginning in a different way than you did on the left, because we had the legs long there, now just take the right knee a little to the outside. And again, don't go all the way to lengthening the leg just yet. Just take the knee a little to the outside and bring it back. So you're just tilting the right knee away from the left knee. And to begin with, don't fight anything. Just notice what happens. Does the pelvis want to roll when you do that? Does something change in your chest or in your neck or in your belly? Another thing Feldenkrais says is that when we prepare to do something difficult, it's that preparation that gets us in trouble. And he talks about how we prepare by straining in different places. He particularly focuses a lot on the chest. So as you're about to tilt the leg, and you're about to allow this certain significant weight of your body to move away from the center, just feel, do you prepare yourself in the chest somehow? Do you stiffen somewhere to prepare for the movement? And again, it may not be immediately possible to experience it this way, but can you at least have the idea that you could begin to take the leg to the outside and eventually to straighten the leg in such a way that you don't have to interrupt the breathing. And so the idea is you're exploring the same idea with the right leg now, but we're doing it in a different order because the left leg, we're having the left leg standing as we explore taking the right knee out to the side and then eventually lengthening the leg downwards. And then, of course, when the leg is long, the same idea that began with taking the outside of the right foot towards the floor, feeling the bend in the knee, and drawing the leg up. And just having a tension in the low back. So notice again, do you have a movement of the foot and a movement of the knee that is more or less simultaneous, that those two places balance each other out? Or do you feel that you begin in one place and then you move in the other place? Remember, you can always rest. You can always rest if something you're feeling is creating a difficulty for you, or you're just needing to kind of take a moment to regain your focus. Rest at any moment. So let's have a rest for everyone. Go ahead and try resting with your legs long now, if that's comfortable, or else you can keep the feet standing. Notice again what's happening in the low back. What's happening in the breathing. Just notice anything that you sense in your experience that's different than before we began. And now return to exploring the movement of drawing up and eventually standing the right leg, but this time the left leg remains long on the floor. So left leg long, and the right leg. Explore this process, and it's perfectly acceptable and even quite a good idea to make partial movements. So you begin to draw the heel up the floor and you think of standing the foot, but maybe before you get all the way there, you sense some of the effort that you don't want, and rather than needing to complete the movement, which is what we all do so habitually in our daily lives, we just push through a difficulty. You're invited here to actually reverse, go back to the beginning, pause, take a breath, maybe refresh your attention by putting your focus in a different part of your body as you move. Rashmi, I see that you might be having some discomfort, and I'm not sure the whole story, but one thing is if just lying on the back this way is difficult, you might just consider putting a little more padding underneath you. Is there just a suggestion? Do you have a question about it? Is something coming up for you? I'm going to unmute you.
Yeah, I noticed sometimes in the past that doing this movement,
Some kind of?
I've noticed in the past that doing this movement of turning my foot and then bringing the heel, sliding it up, works my SI joint in a funny way.
Uh-huh. Okay. Well, so this is precisely what we're looking at, right? But it could well be, because to give you a kind of a, I've already hinted at it, but to give you a preview, what we're after here, although it may sound or feel quite difficult at this point, is the idea that the leg could go from being long through this frog leg movement to being standing with no movement in the pelvis, no movement in the chest. In other words, that there's not this feeling of this weight of the leg pulling and having to pull back against it. But how do we do that? It's not simple. It certainly is not simple. And that's why the whole process of just going slowly, and if you're experiencing pain, taking the option of even imagining the movement. So however you experienced it so far, you already know the idea of the movement, right? So if you begin to do the movement and you experience pain, first of all, stop and go back. And if you want to move again, you go not quite so far the next time. But you also have the option of take just the images and really imagining, okay, my foot is moving here, the knee is bending, all of those things. And that may be what's necessary to work with a little bit. You can listen to a couple of steps of the lesson and then go back into the movements when you feel comfortable. Come in and out. Please take care of yourself that way. Okay, great. It's no interruption to have that conversation. It's a fundamental thing that we all need. And maybe others here could benefit from that same idea of what we just were talking about. Okay, so looks like people are resting meanwhile. But now when you're ready, just take the opportunity to practice what we've been doing. And because I see that people have the legs long, but now can you, with one leg at a time, just slowly make this frog leg movement to bring one foot up to standing and notice what happens elsewhere in you. Do you feel like you have to work in other places? And then the other leg. So you have the feet standing. And just feel the connection of your low back to the floor now, if it's any different than it was before. So we're leaving the feet standing. And come back to what we did at the very beginning. Interlace the hands. Bring them behind the head. And once again, on an exhale with the elbows a little away from the floor, you lift your head and look down. And just, again, notice how parts of your back can really glue themselves to the floor here. Okay, rest for a moment. Keep the feet standing. So the next thing we're going to do is going to involve lifting the head again. And I just want to say ahead of time, in the same spirit of what Rashmi and I were just discussing in terms of taking care of yourself, I'm going to ask you to lift the head and keep it lifted. And then do movements. But of course, you still put it down when you need to. Okay? So now, please do, on an exhale, lift the head, and you're looking down. You feel how the back is connected to the floor here. And now with the head lifted, with the connection that you feel there, slowly take the left leg, take the knee out to the side, and lengthen the leg down, and just feel if you're able to maintain the connection to the floor that you have. And now leave the left leg long. And begin to slowly take the right knee out to the side to lengthen the right leg. Again, noticing, can you maintain the connection of the low back to the floor? And then I'll say what I said already. You can put the head down anytime you'd like. But what you're going to do now is with the left leg remaining long, and every time you move, you're going to do it with the head in the air. You're going to continue exploring the frog leg movement with the right leg. Slowly drawing the heel up as the knee goes out and then bringing over the foot. But see if this differing situation with the head lifted and the consequent change in the shape of your whole spine can begin to give you a new experience of how you do this movement with the leg. So once again, this ideal that Feldenkrais describes, that there's no work in the back, maybe that's not your experience just yet, but find out if there's something about having the head lifted, which of course shifts the weight of your spine against the floor, and parts of the spine that weren't so close to the floor now press into the floor. And can you use that shape in the spine to begin to potentially teach yourself a new way of doing this movement? The left leg remains long, and you're just working with the right leg, but the head is in the air. And you can still, as I mentioned, put the head down whenever you'd like. Take a break before you explore a little further. But the idea is that there's no change in the low back. One thing to notice is as you do this movement, it's got those different parts to it, of the turning the leg to the outside, the drawing of the heel, and then the leg comes back in. But even with those different elements of the trajectory, can you still make the movement at a constant rate of speed? Or do you notice that you accelerate in certain moments? If you do, those moments of acceleration, you probably notice a change in your breath and some kind of effort. Okay, have both feet standing now and rest your head on the floor. And just compare again the feeling of the two sides. And now, would you slowly let both legs, both knees move a little to the outside and lengthen both legs down to the floor? So actually the head can remain on the floor for the moment. Let me unmute you. I see a question. Go ahead, Rashmi.
No, so we're not keeping the head up for this.
Yeah, I said for now you can leave the head on the floor, but you're going to do a few movements now where you explore frog legs with both legs. Now, of course, a moment ago when you were resting, you may well have felt a difference between the two legs because we had just explored these variations with the head lifted only with the right leg. So now as you do this movement that's simultaneous in terms of what's being asked, you may still feel a difference. As you take the two knees out to the side, do you feel that with one leg you want to lead more? So as you make the movements, what do you feel on the left and the right? And now if you'd like to, go ahead and lift the leg, lift the head again, as you did before, and explore frog leg movements with the two legs and the head lifted. And the idea that you at least play with, that there isn't a need for the pelvis to shift on the floor. There isn't a need for contractions in the back or the belly. But maybe those words don't quite match your experience, so you just play with it. Okay, and then the next time you have both feet standing, take a rest again, leave the feet standing. And now please bring your right knee up over your chest. And with your right hand, grab a hold of the front of your right shin, so just below the knee, and bring your left hand now behind your head. Now the movement you're about to do looks like a crunch, but Feldenkrais makes a really big point that you don't want it to feel like one. In other words, you're going to now lift your head just a little bit and bring your head a little closer to your right knee and your right knee a little closer to your head, but do not touch. And he makes a big point, don't even think about touching. So you can make this a very simple movement and feel the folding, but he says something that's very interesting. The second that you have this idea that you want to touch, he says, then you're going to begin to effort in the chest. You're going to begin to stiffen the chest. And what you're looking for instead is a softening of the chest. So can you just think of the distance between, let's say, the elbow and the knee getting slightly smaller than the beginning, but with no need to even dream of touching. Do the movement on an exhale. Okay. And now you're going to continue working with the right leg, but can you switch your hands so that the left hand holds below the knee and the right hand comes behind the head? And do a few movements like this. Feel how especially the right side of the chest needs to soften here. And see if you can really have this attitude that every movement is fresh. That's not, again, a crunch or some gym exercise, but every time you do the movement, can you orient to a curiosity about how this could be simpler? And of course, the simplest way to make it simpler is simply not to try as hard, not to go as far. Okay, rest your head on the floor. Rest your leg for a moment. And now the feet are still standing. Bring the right knee up over the chest. This time, interlace your fingers and hold the knee with both hands. And now you don't have the support of your hands, but you're going to do a similar thing. You're going to lift your head a little bit and bring the knee a little closer, but once again with no idea of touching. Just make it simple. But feel how your back molds itself. And notice when you begin the movement, I saw with at least one person that there was a kind of, the head was tilting back a little bit. So see if you can do the movement in such a way that from the very beginning, the chin is moving towards the chest. Okay? And now leave that alone again. And then we'll explore just one last variation on this movement. Hi, Rashmi, welcome back. No problem. And so now interlace your fingers behind your head. And this time it's the leg that's not supported, but you can bring the right knee up over the chest again. And now lifting your head with your hands and bringing the knee up, you just fold yourself one last time, softening the chest with no sense of ambition that you need to touch any part of yourself to any other part of yourself. So Rashmi, we are on the back, feet standing. And we did this movement with a number of variations, but you can start by holding your right knee with one hand. The others of you can rest now. And bring the other hand behind your head. And you do a couple movements that I was saying it looks like a crunch, but you don't want it to feel like a crunch. So you fold yourself. You feel how your back shapes itself and lower yourself again. Do the movements on the exhale. You'll do a couple movements like this and then pause, and you'll do a couple movements with your hands switched. So the other hand will come behind the head, the other hand to your leg. And then if you want to explore also, there was a variation of both hands supporting the head and no additional support to the leg, and there was a couple movements of holding the leg and not holding the head. So you don't need to do every single one of them. You just explore a few of those and then take a rest. And go ahead and rest with the legs long here. And feel, is something different in the low back on one side? And now, once again, let's do a movement with both legs. Think from beginning with long legs of taking the edges of both feet to the outside and the knees bend and you begin to drop both heels, but feel right away is something different on one side. Maybe you don't do the whole movement. You come back to having the legs long. So this idea we have of doing the movement with quiet in the low back, is that simpler on one side of your back than the other? Okay, so however you do it, above all, you're taking care of yourself. Do bring both legs to standing. If you prefer to do it one leg at a time, that's fine. Or do both legs. And now bring the left knee up over your chest. And because I really do think that while the guidance you receive in a class like this is invaluable, it's also invaluable to choose your own adventure every now and again. Just think about what you did with the other leg. There was 4 different ways of rounding yourself, 4 different ways that you used the hands. And just begin to explore rounding yourself, maybe not in the same order, but 2 of the options involved one hand at the head and the other holding the leg, and then there were the 2 variations of both hands holding the head or both hands holding the knee. But notice there's a reason why Feldenkrais included all of these variations. You organize yourself slightly differently each time. So maybe you simply notice one of the variations is simpler for you than another. But use these variations to notice little aspects of the experience. Especially notice how you're using your back against the floor, the movement of the pelvis. Again, there's 0 goal of touching the knee to the elbow or to the head. Include rests in your exploration. Okay, and if you need another minute to complete what you're doing, take that. If you feel satisfied, go ahead and rest. And you decide if you prefer the legs long with the feet standing. But one interesting thing to notice is when the legs are long, is it simpler now to feel a connection between the low back and the floor. Most people feel quite a difference at least at the beginning of the lesson, between having the legs long or the feet standing. But through this process, you may be able to find a little more connection to the floor in the low back, even with the legs long.
Mhm.
Okay, so again, pay attention to how you do it. You have different options here, but be a frog and bring both feet to standing. Notice as you do, are you preparing in the chest? Are you preparing in the throat or the jaw? Are you stiffening in the shoulders? In fact, just take a minute here in a sort of choose your own adventure kind of way. Work with one leg, work with the other, work with both legs. Maybe you notice one leg movement is simpler. If one leg is simpler, where do you feel the effort on the other side? Or where do you feel the lack of effort on the place with the movement that's the simpler movement for you? You notice the differences. Again, Feldenkrais had so many lessons, but he was always, I think, trying to teach us this art of listening to ourselves and noticing these little details that could be the root of making profound changes, rather than our habitual way of doing things, which is simply to increase the effort whenever we don't quite know what to do. It gets us through individual situations, but it also grooves in this kind of just endless ambition for some kind of perfection that we're not going to make it to. And strangely enough, we can find a lot more of our potential often by not pushing through. Okay, so stand the feet. Again, noticing how you're doing that. Come to the place where the feet are standing. And since we've already many times interlaced the fingers and worked that way, would you please interlace your fingers and look at your hands for a moment, and then switch the interlacing so that whichever thumb is on top, you switch it. And now lift the head here with the non-habitual interlacing of fingers, looking down, feeling again how you can soften the chest, moving on the exhale. How does your back move into the floor here? And then when your head is lifted, begin working with the left leg, lengthening the leg and bringing it back up. If I'm not confusing myself, the last time the head was lifted, we just worked with the right leg. Am I right? Is that correct? Okay, no one seems to be objecting here. Again, seeing, you can put the head down if you wish at any moment, but when the head is lifted, again, you're trying to feel if that different shape that you've created in the spine can help you to discover a way to work less in the low back. Put the head down for a moment. In a moment, we'll come back to this and we can work with both legs. We'll go back and forth. But actually, keep the feet standing. Before lifting the head, just take one knee out to the side and do the frog leg movement of lengthening it and bringing it back up, and see what does the pelvis do. Does the pelvis roll to the side? And then try the other leg. So Feldenkrais says that the pelvis can remain completely still, which again might feel like a bit of a challenge. But think of it this way for a moment. So just pause. If let's say you're lengthening the left leg, and for many people, what they'll feel is they take the left knee out to the left. They feel that the pelvis wants to follow the weight of the leg and roll to the left. So to counteract that movement, you can imagine that rather than rolling to the left, you would need some kind of effort to roll the pelvis to the right to sort of counteract the urge to roll to the left. So try this. Try taking the left knee out to the left at the same moment that you take the right knee out to the right, but instead of taking both legs long, you're just going to lengthen the left leg, and as the left leg lengthens completely, the right leg comes back to the middle. But the right leg is creating a counterweight so that maybe the pelvis doesn't have to roll so far to the left. So again, it's as if the right knee goes a little out to the side and comes back, while the left knee goes out to the side, and then the movement continues so that you lengthen the left leg. And then in the same way, when you make the frog leg movement to bring the left leg up, notice, does the pelvis want to roll out to the left? And could you use this movement of taking the right knee to the right to approximate a little more stillness in the pelvis as you do the movement? And then, of course, you can try the same experiment with doing frog leg movements of the right leg and just tilting the left knee a little out to the side as a counterweight. And this variation I'm giving you here, this is my creation. This is not Feldenkrais's idea. But the reason I tell you this is because, just like maybe you've experienced so far, when I do this lesson, there's plenty of times where I say, well, how am I supposed to prevent the pelvis from moving? And so Feldenkrais didn't ask me to do this particular thing, but it was just an idea that came to me, so I decided to give it a try. So maybe it's useful to you. But in any case, I would invite you throughout the course of the 3 lessons we're doing together, if there's little bits and pieces that pique your curiosity, or if there's some unanswered question, or if there's some other thing that comes to mind, you'll have the recordings. You can go back to these explorations, and I think it's wonderful if you add in your own spices and you ask your own questions about how this is being done. Okay, so now some of you are resting already. When you're ready, again, investigating how you do the thing. You bring the feet standing. And now let's go back to having the head lifted. You can interlace the fingers habitually or non-habitually, your choice. But now try lengthening one leg and bringing it back up, and then lengthening the other. And maybe, if you like, if you still find that the pelvis is moving a little more than you wish, could you simply imagine the other leg as a counterweight, the way we did before? So you're not actually going to shift the other leg, but you imagine if the pelvis wants to roll to one side, you use your imagination to think of how the pelvis would be organized if it was rolling the other way. What would the other parts of you be doing? And here, of course, the connection of the back to the floor is essential. Because as soon as the pelvis is rolling, you'll feel parts of the back of your chest are coming away from the floor. Remember to rest your head on the floor anytime you like. Okay, bring your feet standing and lower the head to the floor. And now please, again, bring the hands behind the head. As you exhale, lift the head to look down. Keep the head lifted. And now work with the, let's say, work with the left leg. As you do the frog leg movement to lengthen the leg, lower the head back to the floor so that as the leg becomes long, the head is on the floor. And then as you draw the leg up, lift the head. So the knee is still going to the outside. There's a way that, of course, you could drag the heel directly up under the knee, but we're looking for this movement where we get this frog leg. So as the leg comes up, the head is lifted. As the leg goes down, the head is lowered. And then pause for a moment and reverse the coordination so that when the leg comes up, you have the head on the floor, and then you lift the head as you lengthen the leg. Every time you do it, it's this frog leg. And just notice if you're somehow finding a way to have more quiet in the low back as you do this. Okay, rest your head on the floor. Just to give you a sense of all the possibilities, I could have asked you to do that same thing with the right leg long. The right foot was standing. I suspect that would be a little more challenging, but it would have been also illuminating. But we won't do every variation imaginable. But you can be sure Feldenkrais did all kinds of variations all the time. He was known for, the people traveled with him, talked about how they would wake up in the middle of the night and find him on the floor doing little movements. I had one of my trainers say something I'll never forget, which was that nobody ever taught Moshe Feldenkrais the Feldenkrais method. Right? He just made it up and he became interested in these relationships and he investigated them. So when you're ready, start with the feet standing again. And so you're going to keep the left foot standing and you're going to work with frog leg movements the right leg, and you're going to lift and lower the head. And of course, there's two ways you can combine that with the movement. So you go ahead and explore that again at your own pace, resting whenever you need it. So left leg, left foot is standing. Left foot is standing. That's right. And then the right leg, that's right, will frog leg its way down and frog leg its way up. Now, if you are curious, you could try these movements with the left leg long as well, since I mentioned it. You didn't do that on the other side, but in any case, you're looking for this quiet in the low back, and there's something about the lifting and the lowering of the head that may inform how that happens. If you like, you can remind yourself, just simply lift and lower the head without moving the legs, whether the legs are long or standing, and feel what that does. And then feel, can you coordinate the leg movements with the lifting of the head? Okay, so maybe take another half a minute or so and then rest. Just take a moment wherever you're at now to let go of everything. Once again, just remember, despite the fact that you're being asked over and over if you can do this particular thing, that in fact, if you do that particular thing or not, it's not important. Actually, I reminded myself I'm going to read you a little bit from the transcript of what Feldenkrais said around this point after working on this. He says, "We're so used to preparing for the difficult thing that even if we listen and don't intend to do anything difficult, we already strain the chest and interfere." So I point this out about the chest again. And then as he's directing the movement, he says, he's asking for a movement of the left leg. He says, "Extend the left leg to the best of your ability. That means do it so well that it will be bad." And then he says, "Oh, that's not so clear." And he explains further, "If you try to not do it very well, you will succeed. Do it a little less well than you can. Extend the left leg so it doesn't matter if it moves a bit. It is better than before, and that is enough. If you do it like this, then you succeed and do it really well. If it doesn't succeed, it is not terrible. You will not be thrown out of here because of that. For example, it is very good to have $1 million, but it is also very good to have $100,000. So this is Feldenkrais' personality. So keep the 100,000, don't worry about the million. Okay, here's one last thing that I think is fun to play with. It's another thing that's not in the transcript, but it's actually not so much my idea. This is something that I've encountered elsewhere, and it may well be that Feldenkrais taught many variations on this lesson. I wouldn't be surprised. But if you think about it, we've worked with one leg, we've worked with the other leg, we've worked with the two legs together. But now can you bring one leg to standing and pay attention how you do this, if you can do it with quiet in the low back. So one leg is standing, one leg is long, and then can you do a movement where you're doing two frog legs, but one frog leg is going up and the other one is going down. And just feel as you do the movement, I already saw this happen with a couple of you. Are you completing the movement of one leg before the other? So it's a little tricky. They're not mirroring each other. But one thing that is potentially helpful is, again, the legs may counterbalance each other to some extent. You might imagine that there's a moment halfway through the movement where if someone took a photo of you, they would see something symmetrical with both knees out to the side. So think again about what he said about the chest. Do you prepare for difficulty? Do you stiffen somewhere? Maybe one of these variations is easier than the other. One leg going from long to standing while the other one goes from standing to long is maybe easier than the reverse. Just notice any differences here. And then just, again, playing with the elements you already have. If you'd like, you could include lifting the head as you do this. You could do it so that the head stays lifted as you explore, or you could be lifting and lowering the head in different combinations. But it's not just to do a bunch of variations. You're always looking for this possibility that the work, Feldenkrais says that the only work is in the leg muscles, that the back does not need to strain. And so you just feel, even if that's not absolutely what's happening for you, is the back a little simpler than when you began? Okay, come to the place of having both feet standing. So that was the grand finale. You already did the the complicated thing. Now we're just going to end with, go back to something very simple. So as I mentioned before a few times, one way we can investigate the thing that's difficult is to just do the very first thing, the very beginning. So would you please now just move both knees, let's say no more than 1 inch away from each other, and bring them back very quietly. And feel, is there any need for the back to arch when you do this? This relates to what Rashmi and I were talking about. Does the pelvis have to get pulled? Does the back have to strain here? And if you go to the point where you feel it begins to happen, can you simply make it smaller and do a movement you can enjoy with no sense of strain, even if it's 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch? And then just once, wherever you're at with it, do very slowly take the knees, both knees out to the side to the point where you lengthen the legs down and rest there, feeling what's happening, or maybe you might say what's not happening in the low back now, how your legs rest on the floor. And now a very similar kind of thing, not making a whole movement, but just as if you were going to do the first 1/2 inch of drawing both legs up. You just begin to take the outsides of the feet a little towards the floor and come back. You're not standing the feet. You don't even get to the point of really thinking of dragging them up. You just begin this outward rotation and feel, can you do it with a quiet low back? And once again, if you feel that you begin to effort, just make it smaller, or imagine the movement. Now, I wouldn't rule out if someone had enough kind of chronic pain in this area that even imagining a movement like this might begin to create an activation. But if you think about it, just imagining doing the movement shouldn't lead to any need to effort in the back. So if that's where you're at, you just imagine the movement, but as you imagine it, you feel that solid connection of your back to the floor. And then if that's easy, you make a small, small movement. But you don't actually challenge yourself when you feel that strain begins to happen. But what you can do is feel that effort, and you can ask yourself to do the movement the next time without including that effort. So to the extent that we're making an effort we don't want, we make it smaller and smaller so we can sense the very first moment where that effort, Feldenkrais called it parasitic effort, where it begins, and then we just stop right there, and we don't repeat the experience of over-efforting. We're happy with small, just to have the experience of minimal effort. Okay, leave this completely alone. Just rest now. Feel how each of your legs lie on the floor. The length of your spine. One more thing that I can't believe I didn't mention, but it's another just way to think of this. Maybe you can work with it just here at the end one time. If you arch the back, if you contract, of course you, in a sense, shorten the length of the spine. So in a moment you'll get up, but as you bring the legs up, and don't do it yet, but as you do it, whether it's one leg at a time or together, can you imagine the length of your spine, and even imagine that the spine gets longer as you do the movement? So you maintain this length all the way up through the top of your head, like you could be pushing something with the top of your head as you brought the feet up into standing. And that's an image that if you do revisit the lesson, you could usefully bring in before the very end where I'm mentioning it here. But see if that makes sense, and see if you can feel how the other way to do this movement would be to essentially shorten yourself and make yourself smaller as you draw the legs up. Okay, in any case, bring the feet to standing, and then roll to the side, and come up all the way onto your feet. And just take a moment to stand and feel how you are. Can you still have a little bit of that sense of a quiet low back and standing? Feel the length of your spine. And you could take a little walk around the room. Once again, feeling if you can feel just a sort of a quiet. Keep using the word, it's the best word I can think of. Can the low back be quiet as you walk around the room? Okay, so this is our first lesson, and it's just a few minutes before the hour. I would love to hear from any of you how that went, or hear if there's any additional questions before we go on to part 2 tomorrow. I see Colette is still walking and experimenting. That's great. You may well, if you don't have to go into some activity right now, you might enjoy taking a walk outside, or just continuing to have a little more time for yourself. But before we say goodbye, is there anyone who'd like to share something? You're muted now, but if you just wave at me, I can unmute you. Rashmi, can I just ask you, or did you manage to sort of get through the discomfort you had and figure out another way to work through it?
Yeah, I really appreciated the instruction also at the very end about lengthening, because I was noticing that I was kind of pushing down in a way.
Yeah.
And it's going to take me some thinking and practicing.
Great. Yeah.
Lengthen that way.
If I could do this all over again, which of course we never can, I would have made that comment earlier on, but I'm glad we snuck it in. And that will actually be a theme of the lesson tomorrow, which, as you'll see, there's at least a couple of the frog leg movements in the lesson tomorrow.
Okay.
And he makes the point over and over, you'll see, about the length of the spine. So great, glad that helped. Christine, were you about to say something?
Yeah, I've been thinking about, I am hypermobile, and I started to think about how much I was widening, how much my knees were going apart, because I think I would go to the extreme, and then it's really, I'm straining, right? I'm thinking about counterbalancing. So I've just been thinking about how far I'm taking the knees and where I feel it in my back and my hips. So it's just starting to wonder about that.
Yeah, really good to wonder about. What Feldenkrais says in his version is that you take the knee out to the side to the point where it's comfortable. And if it stops being comfortable, then you lengthen the leg. And it's going to be a different, let's say, angle for different people. But absolutely, part of what we're really working with here is understanding that the legs are not the pelvis and the legs are not the back, and that but when we don't have a total clarity in the essentially in the neural pattern that begins the movement, we just right away we block these things together, and the movement, we don't know how to allow this movement of this particular weight without this other part of ourselves being tied along to it. So this is kind of what we're playing with here. And I think that this is a lesson, you know, if you found it useful, you maybe come back to and look at that. But for sure, just self-care is always important as we do these things, not only for self-care itself, but for the learning, because when we begin to go in the strain, we can't create the change that we're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Great. Just to see if Lisa or Colette had anything they wanted to share. Colette's coming over. Let's see. No, no problem. Okay. So good. Okay. Well, this was our first lesson. I am going to, as quickly as I can, get the recording that we have just made together and get that out to you as well as the other folks. And I hope you can make it again tomorrow. I know that for many of us, being here all 3 days live may or may not have been possible, but that's why the recordings are there. So I hope to see you tomorrow. And I'd also love to, you know, if you have any thoughts to share later, if you want to email me, I'd be happy to see that, and I will respond. And in any case, that's it for today, and we'll be back tomorrow. So thanks again.
Thanks, Seth.
Yeah, take care.